Good evening and welcome to another session of Gather to Grow here on Food for Mzansi. I'm really excited about tonight's discussion because I welcome with me co-host Food for Africa's Head of News, Lucinda Dordley. We'll be taking the reins tonight talking about the Zimbabwean land audits. We're just going to find out what the status is. We have a few experts coming to talk to us about it. And of course, we have our listeners who we're hoping will engage with us this evening on the topic. Welcome, Lucinda. Great to have you here as host and me as co-host on Gather to Grow tonight for foodforafrica.com.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Dawn. I'm Lucinda Dodley, the head of news for Food for Africa, and I'm very excited to be kicking off with this evening's topic. It has proven to be quite controversial, as Dawn and I were both discussing how difficult it was for both of us to actually lock speakers who were willing to engage this evening, but I'm hoping that everybody can learn something new from this evening's spaces.
Yes, definitely. And two of our speakers, who is Clarence, Mashavadi, Zimbabwean farmer and agricultural economist, is also just trying to connect. And then we have Katlego, who's not new to this space, as well as Ishmael Rupanga, who's a beef and dairy consultant as well. But Lucinda, maybe as a start, we can give Katlego the floor just to tell us a little bit about herself for those who might not know her.
Evening, everyone, and thank you so much for the opportunity to join you guys tonight. My name is Katlego. I run a legal firm in South Africa that specializes in agricultural law. Put simply, all my clients are farmers, and I help them with the legal aspects of what they do. That's about me, and I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you, Katlego. So just for a little bit of context before we dive into the questions, the Zimbabwean government is currently going through its third phase of land audits. And there was also a legislation that was gazetted in March of 2020 that says that former landowners may opt for the repossession of confiscated land or receive monetary compensation for compensated land. And this legislation only applies to native Zimbabwean farmers. The current phase of land audits has been ongoing since 2018, and there are still about 100,000 farms that Zimbabwean government wants to audit before the third phase concludes at the end of this year. And then, Katlego, what are some of the legal rights a farmer, especially a native Zimbabwean farmer, needs to be aware of during the auditing process?
To just start from the beginning, when it comes to land audits, it's not much a farmer can do to stop it. A government can decide they want to know what is the current ownership of land in a country. South Africa has done it before, and we have quite a well-versed GIS, it's called, of what's going on in the country in terms of who owns land, how much land they own, where is it. And we've got it from not just knocking on doors, talking to farmers, but we've done it also from aerial points of view, where we've got pictures and all sorts of things of land markings and land borders. So I think from a point of departure, that's what we should know, that it's not a choice, that a farmer can say, oh, I don't want an audit to be done. They're going to do it anyway. Your best bet is to participate and see what the result is. In the case of Zimbabwe, obviously they're trying to wrong the past, and sort of rewind and get things back to how it used to be. This is, again, not new. When we did it in South Africa, the land issue is an issue of saying, okay, how much land can we redress and give back to historically unfairly treated people, where land was taken unfairly from the rightful owners of that land, and how do we restore the land back to them? Whether you restore the land as in physically people get the land back, or it's via compensatory measures, that's a whole nother issue. So I think to answer your question, it would be more to say it's going to happen. You can't stop it as a farmer to say, well, you can't audit me. Of course they can, they're the government, they can do so. But it's not a bad thing also to be audited. It's just a case of it's information gathering to know what is happening in a country in terms of agricultural land, who's got the agricultural land, who's using that agricultural land, and how are they using it. And actually that could be to the benefit of farmers to have an idea of what's happening in different parts of their country and how effective the farming is. We don't want wasteful use of agricultural land. We also don't want agricultural land that is completely not being used at all and just being left there. Something has to be done. So this is not a negative thing. And I would say that farmers should be encouraging it because it doesn't come from their own pocket to find out what your neighbor next door to you is up to. You're going to get the information for free.
Very interesting, Katlego. Thank you. Clarence, who is an agricultural economist who is also based in Zimbabwe. Clarence, do you mind introducing yourself and telling us a little bit more about what you do?
My name is Clarence Mashavadi, and I am an agricultural economist, as mentioned by our host. But also, interestingly, the reason why I was willing or excited to talk on this topic is not only am I an agricultural economist, but I'm also a farmer in Zimbabwe. I've been into full-time farming now for about 3 years, mainly focusing on horticulture. That's me in a nutshell.
Thanks so much for joining us, Clarence. I think it's amazing just to also have you here to kind of give us some context as a farmer, but also as an agricultural economist. What is happening on the ground? What does the feel from farmers like yourself currently operating, being audited? What is it like at the moment?
I'm sure there are many farmers listening right now, and no matter where you are, whichever country you come from, I know that they'll attest to the fact that farming is flames. It's a really stressful profession, but it's a profession that's also worth it. Right now on the ground, I would say the agricultural field or the playing level of the game of agriculture is even. It's a bit erratic, but it's even in the sense that anyone who is interested into agriculture right now can just get in when they want. They can do any crop they want that they think that they're good at. The markets are open. We have the open markets, the supermarkets, the wholesale markets. We have the government organizations like Grain Marketing Board, Kotko, the dairy that are there. So the market is generally open, like the field is generally open. But like any other field, we are having a lot of challenges when it comes to climate. The whole climate change thing that's coming on, it's been hectic. Funding has been a really big issue. Lack of funding, probably something that we'll touch on later on why it's like that. And also just generally slow adaptation of mechanization and technologies, which is also attributed to the lack of funding. That's what just making the playing field a little bit difficult. But generally, with the feel of things, I'm hopeful that we are getting somewhere. For the first time in forever, I would say that Zim agriculture is starting to take shape after everything that's been happening before.
So, Clarence, we know in Africa in general, agriculture is the backbone of the economy. And the land repossession and redistribution debate has been going on for more than 2 decades now. In your opinion, do you think that the redistribution, do you think that it benefits the farmers in the long run? Or do you think that it's more beneficial for government? Or do you think it's a case of the two need to work together to actually achieve the outcomes that's best for Zimbabwe's economy as a whole?
The structure of the A1 and A2 farming models is a really good structure, I would say. Is it more beneficial to the farmers or to the government? I would say also that the government generally or the state or is representing the people. So if it's going to be benefiting the government some way, somehow, it should be benefiting the farmers and the people. The only thing that I would say is a challenge with this structure is the issue of support. I understand previously before the redistribution of land, the previous owners of the farms were well supported in terms of loans and making sure that the farms are well mechanized. I understand they would receive, I'm not going to get into numbers and statistics because I'm no longer sure of my figures, but I would sure that the previous farmers would get loans from the bank that would require them like 10 years, 15 years to pay back, that were really flexible with very low interest rates, and they'll get all the support they need in terms of policy, in terms of information, in terms of extension services. That's one thing that has been making the structure of the A1, A2 distribution really difficult in that, like in previous years, there's been very little support for farmers. It has been there, but it has been very little, or it was not as significant as what is needed for it to be a success. Because you'd see that most farmers would try to do their best with the farms, but they would end up doing just subsistence farming, and most farms ended up being just dumped, which has led to the land audit now that people are now being audited. Like, how are you utilizing your farm? What are you doing? How many people are you employing? I was also audited. I now know the process because I was also audited at our farm. They want to know the structures that are there, the structures that were there before you, and there any new structures. They want to know your productivity. In short, they just need to know your productivity levels. to see if the farm is utilized. So I'm not sure how they're going to use the information. It's information that they can use to say what kind of support do we need to help our farmers, or to what extent do we need to support our farmers.
Okay, everyone, welcome back. Our speakers have rejoined. Clarence, do you mind continuing with what you were just telling us about how you also were audited?
So I was saying that I was also audited. So it's something that I've experienced firsthand. And the stuff that they needed to know is stuff that's generally linked to productivity. They wanted to know how productive you are. So it's not a scary process. It's not a process that's being done to intimidate farmers or anything, but it's only data collection that can be used for the national benefit, helping in stuff like just knowing the areas of certain crops that are being grown around the country, how best, I guess, it's information they can use on how best they can assist farmers when it comes to issues of funding and just general support and on extension services and stuff like that, like knowing how this area needs greater amount of, let's say, veterinary extension services more than that other area and stuff like that, because they know they do more of livestock or more of grain crops and stuff like that. So the question was based on, is the A1, A2 model more beneficial to farmers or more beneficial to the government? I would say it's a model that's very beneficial to the country at large. However, is need for great support for it to be very successful. It's starting to take shape now than previously. There's a lot of support coming in. There's a lot of agriculture extension services that is now happening. Agri-Techs officers are now equipped. They are now more mobile. They have motorbikes and stuff like that. But we still have a long way to go, and also improving on the issue of security of tenure so that the A1 and A2 farmers can have access to funding or access to loans using that same area.
Thank you, Clarence. Ishmael Rupanga, who is a dairy consultant, to introduce himself to us and tell us a little bit about what he does.
I dairy and beef consultancy for a company called Your Farm Genetics. We supply semen and fishery insemination services. I'm also a full-time farmer in Zimbabwe and on an A2 farm. So basically, that's more about myself.
So Ishmael, Clarence just mentioned that there could be more that is done for farmers during the auditing and redistribution process. I wanted to ask you, have you yet been audited? And where do you think that government can sort of pick up the slack in the areas of focus that you believe, as someone who works in agriculture, should be the focus of government at this point in time?
This is actually a very, very controversial topic, but I'll try to share a bit on what I understand or what I've experienced during all this time. And one thing we all have to realize is land is not just Zimbabwe or South Africa, but all over the world. We see all these wars and all these, it's all because of land. It's a very, very controversial issue. And we know there's people out there trying to be the superpowers. And the only way you can do that is owning land. And we know most of the things in this world, it all starts in the land, whether it's mining or oil or gold and agriculture. So everything starts in the land. So it's a very controversial topic, especially in Zimbabwe, where it's now it becomes a bit political. So the government has been doing, initially when this land was distributed, end of the 90s and early 2000s, most people thought program, the A1 and A2 models, was more to do with ZANU-PF, which is true and to some extent false. What I realized is some people didn't apply for the land thinking it was a political stance. But 20 years later, people are now realizing that the land distribution was actually done to give land back to the natives of Zimbabwe. So during this whole process, we've seen the struggles we faced in Zim in terms of the economy and politics within the main opposition and the ruling government. It's been more politicized than anything else. My thought now from your question is, I think there's need for more transparency from the government in terms of when the audits are done. The results should be out there. People can have access to these audits when they are done to say, we've audited so much land and how much land is being utilized and how much land is unutilized. So I think it's been a process which has been done for quite some time and it hasn't been really transparent. So the main issue is it comes back to transparency. If this is going to be transparent, I think to be a success program, the government has to be really transparent and has to move quick because we can't keep on having, there's quite a lot of land which is lying idle. And there's quite a lot of applications which are at the ministry of people who are looking for land and who want to invest in, like real investors who want to invest in the land. But now it always comes back to the controversies of politics. So I think my main thinking or line of thought as well is, if there is any way the government can privatize this auditing instead of the government itself doing the auditing, I think it can help a great deal to get better results from a private firm or private players. The government has been trying to do a lot since 1980s, even before the land distribution, in terms of giving inputs, and even now we've got new programs like Command Agriculture, Presidential Input Schemes, and all those schemes, but they're still not really transparent as well. And because there's too much involvement of politics between parties and using land as a tool for gaining power and all those things.
Thank you, Ishmael. That was actually quite enlightening, because looking at how the media reports on the auditing process, and there's a lot of questions that are being asked, why is the information of the auditing not being made available, especially to the farmers that have been audited. So, Katlego, so you mentioned earlier that there is really nothing that a farmer can do to sort of stop the auditing process from happening once they have been selected for auditing. But my question for you is, what are the steps that Zimbabwean government has to follow when auditing a farm? Can you take us through that?
The previous speaker already sort of touched on it by mentioning the fact that it would be important to have transparency, and there should be transparency in the process. So farmers should be maybe forewarned to know what to expect when the auditors or the people that are responsible for auditing come to your farm, what kind of questions or what kind of documents you should prepare in order for them to be successful at their job. And I think lastly, just to know also as a feedback, the government to give the people an idea of what is it exactly that they're looking for. What is the aim and the purpose of the exercise? I mean, I've heard now everybody talking about productivity. And so maybe that's what the audit is about. It's just to see productivity throughout the country within the agricultural space. But I mean, an audit can be broader than just the productivity audit. It could be just about also finding out how many black farmers are there versus white farmers in a country. That was the audit of South Africa, and that's what the results came out as, to see also how much land is in white hands versus black hands, female hands versus male hands. And that gives a government an idea of how to help the agricultural sector, where you can see after an audit that there's certain areas that are lacking, that need more attention than others. So I would say I would expect the government to be transparent in its process, including obviously the end goal of also divulging what the results say and being honest about it, without making people suspicious or paranoid that maybe it means that they're trying to do something with information, but that's why they're not sharing it.
Thank you, Katlego, both Ishmael and to Clarence. Since both of you guys are both actively farming, over the course of the past 2 decades, how has the landscape of agriculture in Zimbabwe changed? And do you think that it has been positive change or a change that indicates that there's more work that needs to be done?
Comparing the agricultural landscape from, let's say, 20 years ago and now, definitely we all know that there's a huge discrepancy, or there's a huge difference that's there. Back then, agriculture used to be a lot more productive than it has been for the last 20 years or so. We have just started, I think from 2019, we've just started to see an upward trajectory. So before going to the things that we all know we want to talk about on why it's like that, we cannot discount some things like the climate has really changed. We might just try to say it's because of this and that, but you'd see like this year and last year, there's been more land that has been farmed more than any other time during the 20-year period after the land distribution. But still the yield levels are low. So it tells you how the climate is also impacting that. Of course, I'll still highlight the issue of support. Back then, farmers had a lot more support, or probably the government back then had the capacity to support farmers with better financial and technological help. But around this time, it's financing a project is really hard. I'm sure Ishmael would attest, like right now, he's trying to fund for a 25-hectare center pivot for irrigation. It's been an uphill task for him, but probably back then it would be just a matter of signing papers and just waiting for your pivot to come. the productivity levels are very different. Things are a bit lower. But I'm very optimistic because over the past 3 to 5 years, we're seeing more uptake of farming. We're seeing people trying to improve their farms, people trying to be more mechanized. It's just taking longer because of the issue of financing and the issue of security of land to access loans. It's something that I hear the government, hoping it's not just a campaigning strategy, is trying to look at and work on to see if we can have security of land tenure and also more support for farmers. So I would say that we, so far, I think upward trajectory, although it's at a very, very slow pace at the moment.
Thanks, Clarence. I think it's so amazing that we can call on your lived experience and just the experience of you on the ground and you yourself being audited and what that was like. And also just, I mean, as a new farmer, it's interesting just to get your perspective on it.
Katlego, you mentioned some very salient points earlier about the transparency that needs to be implemented. But I also wanted to ask, there is absolutely no way in which a farmer can dispute an audit. When government comes to them, do they just have to allow government to come to the farm, see anything, ask them questions? There's no way that they can stop it at all.
It's private ownership on a farm, so I suppose you could say you're not allowed to get on my farm because it's privately owned. But the question would be, why are you against them coming onto the farm? What is it that you're hiding? So if a farmer said to me, Kati, I don't want them on my farm, I'd probably say, what is it that you're hiding that you think they're going to find? Because I think even with the Zimbabwe audit, we have a general idea of what they're looking for, which is productivity, or trying to find out how productivity is going on the different farms. There's nothing wrong with that. So yes, you could stop somebody from coming onto your property because it's private property. But the question would be why? What do you think they're going to do, except for ask you questions and look at what you're doing and all of that? I think if it was an aggressive audit where it's a repossession of land conversation or whatever the case might be, then of course you have a right to assert your rights as a property owner and say no and refuse entry onto the property. But in this case, the reason why I say a farmer can't say no is that what I'm actually saying is that a farmer shouldn't say no, because what is the reason for saying no? There's no ulterior motive, at least from what I understand of the land audit in Zimbabwe. There doesn't seem yet to be an ulterior motive at play by the government. And it's not a new thing, so it's not like the government is doing something that hasn't been done before. South Africa just had one. I think our latest one is 2018. So there's nothing to be scared of. That's what I'm trying to portray.
I think that's a very important aspect, and maybe a lot of farmers feel the same and maybe some farmers don't. Ishmael, let's try again to bring you into the conversation to highlight some of this in your opinion.
I just want also to add on what the league was talking about. There's a big difference now in Zimbabwe because most of the land is government owned. You don't have that much right to say no because you don't own the land, because most of this land is being leased from the government. So if the government says they're coming to do an audit, you don't have any rights. You have to comply. So that's one thing I just wanted to point out. We're seeing a better sort of trajectory. What's happening now is I've noticed there's been an encouragement of partnerships. So there's a bit of investment coming in. There's people partnering with people overseas or bringing in new investors on farms and all. And the government has been trying its best to support the agriculture by trying to put in some programs to help out, like funding through banks. And even though, the process is a bit hectic, like what Clarence was saying, I think the government is trying to chip in so that the agri can contribute is what used to do back in the day to the economy. Zimbabwe is mainly sort of agri-based. I think it's second to mining. So the government has been trying its level best to see ways of funding. Like now, they've been revitalizing some irrigation schemes which were there a long time ago, but still comes back to the issue I mentioned earlier in terms of transparency. The major challenging factor, as much as they are trying to sort of help fund some of these things, is the instability of the Zimbabwean economy. If you want to go try find a loan from the bank, the interest rates are so exorbitant and they're very high, which makes it so hard for farmers to pay back. Even the repayment periods are just too small, the period. If you try to go now and try to fund, you can get a loan and they require you to pay back in 12 months, which is sort of ridiculous at 40 to 50% interest rates. So that's the other challenge why the trajectory is we might want it to happen. And us is now used in the agriculture sector. We are also trying to shy away from that element of the land was just distributed for the sake of it. It's been there's a lot which has been lacking in terms of treating farming as a business, which is one thing we've been trying to push for the youth who are coming into the agriculture industry to treat farming as a business. So if we try and hammer that into most of the farmers, especially the young ones we work with, I think it will help a great deal.
Thanks, Ishmael. I think you've raised a few important points there. The one being new players in the game or people who are just entering the sector to treat this farming as a business practices throughout. Maybe as a follow-up question, I'd maybe like to ask, with the process of government undertaking the land audits and the processes that goes with that, are you finding that there's more investment into the agricultural sector in Zimbabwe as farmers who actually work there? What is the experience of yourself and others within your network?
Like I mentioned earlier, this land issue is very, very controversial. The progress will only come if there's sort of a lot of settlements being done. If we look at these BIPA farms which were taken and all this compensation which is being talked about, compensating on the improvements which were done by the farmers who had their land taken. I know there's an agreement which was done amounting to $4.5 billion. I'm not sure where that money will come from. There's quite a lot of things which needs to be settled. There's still a lot of the political issue I always talk about. Like, it makes everything so hard to comprehend because the land is now being used for politics. That's the main challenge facing right now. So it's quite a tricky scenario.
I totally agree with that. And even deciding on this topic and wanting to kind of talk about it, we kept that in the back of our minds to say that this is a continuous process and we don't have all the answers yet. I think Katlego was mentioning that as well as we prepared for this, Lucinda.
That's very true. Clarence, you mentioned earlier that you've only been farming for about 3 years now, and you also were recently audited. What are words of advice that you would give to another young farmer who is also anticipating an audit?
Being into full-time farming, I understand how difficult it is to start. Difficult to see through also a project. Yes, it's very difficult to start, but when you start, it's also very difficult to see through the project. So sometimes people wouldn't understand because they measure effort, they want to see things on the ground. But sometimes it's just so bad for you that you wouldn't have anything on the ground, but you have been putting effort for a long time and it might just happen. Because these audits are not like the meetings are not planned in advance. You'll just see the extension officer there all of a sudden and they're already moving around the farm. So I would advise that if you have a piece of land as a young farmer or as any type of farmer, try to do something within your capacity. It's better to argue that I'm doing what I can, not because I can utilize, let's say, for example, you have 10 hectares. If you think you can utilize 1 hectare, utilize that 1 hectare so good that even when you're audited, you'll be like, no, I'm utilizing 1 hectare because that's what I can fund. If you can assist with funding, if you can assist with support, then I can be utilizing the other area. So I would say that make sure that there's something, make sure if you feel like the crops are not doing well, you can even do livestock if you have your own livestock. Try to construct a few permanent structures at the farm, shared rooms, storerooms, accommodation for workers. It's something that they look at also. Like, okay, fine, you're employing people, you're providing shelter for some people. That's a good thing. So just try to utilize the farm in many ways that you can, be it in production, be it in infrastructure and the likes.
Clarence, you mentioned that there's efforts from new farmers and all of those sorts of things. But I also wanted to ask, do you think that there is sort of collaboration happening between new farmers? Are they working together independently to help one another, find new ways of irrigation and all of those sorts of things? Or do you think that there's a large reliance upon government to sort of show new farmers the way?
Support from government or reliance on government is straightforward. It's either you get it or you don't. It's either you have access to it or you don't. People are more reliant on each other now more than anything. People are trying to form a lot of synergies so that they can at least survive in this very erratic industry. So people are coming up with groups that they share experiences. People are trying to collaborate. People are trying to get like collaborations with also companies for contract farming as a way to utilize their land and to get support. I think people are more reliant on each other in the private sector, but the government is doing all it can to make sure that things are okay. But it's the government, it should do that. Like, we shouldn't be expecting or be very grateful that they are, because it's kind of their job. So that's my answer.
Thanks so much for that context. Lucinda, I think we've covered a lot of ground in terms of, updating our listeners in terms of what the status is. But maybe we can start talking about what the anticipation is of farmers moving forward post these audits. Katlego, what do you anticipate will happen once it's completed?
I don't anticipate, because you can never guess what a government's going to do. Our government's going to be very unpredictable. I have a hope, though. I have a hope that the audit will come out and it will be made public, and that will give farmers and the agricultural sector as a whole the opportunity to know what's happening in Zimbabwe's agricultural sector. I mean, it's not just for the locals in Zimbabwe, but also for us as their neighbor. It'd be very interesting to know and see that audit when it comes out, to see what's going on, what are the opportunities, what are the gaps, that we can fill as the agricultural sector. So I hope it happens. I hope that they make it public. I fear that if they don't, it will instill the paranoia again of, are we going backwards or are we going forwards? But if it does come out, that's wonderful, because it says that we're making a step forwards towards the democracy we want to see, the free economy we want to see in Zimbabwe, and the greatness of Zimbabwe fully coming back, from an agricultural point of view.
Thanks so much, Katlego. And yeah, maybe I shouldn't say anticipation, maybe the hope then. Ishmael, maybe you want to share your comments in closing, also just your hope in terms of what this land audit will actually mean for farmers in Zimbabwe and just the economy and food production in the country.
I would say that the land audit is something that's really positive. Like some of the colleagues highlighted, that a lot of information can be collected from that, from ownership to who owns what, how much they own, what is being done, where and how much is being utilized or not. It's a lot of information that can be used for forward planning that would really help agriculture and the economy going onwards. We just pray that the information will be used in that manner, and it get us to a point where we are going to see more support for farmers, more regularization of the agricultural space in terms of export incentives, in terms of the imports that come to compete with our products, a lot of things, probably to show the capacity of some of the crops that are always usually flooded all year round, and we still see the same crops being imported too. So we just hope for the best for the land audit, and that the information will be used for good and for the betterment of every player involved in agriculture.
Thank you to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucinda.
Thank you.
You were an awesome host. Thank you, Katlego. Thank you, Ishmael. Thank you, Clarence. Lucinda, it was great to have you as host for foodforafrica.com, and looking forward to doing this with you again. All the best with everyone. All the best to the Zim farmers with the land audits, and everything of the best for your future in the sector. Have a great evening. Bye for now.